The wind howled across the wasteland like a beast that never slept. Snowflakes cut through the air like tiny blades, striking against broken rocks and dead trees. In the middle of this frozen land stood a cage, half buried in ice, its iron bars glowing faintly with frost. Inside, a small figure shivered, her body pressed against the corner for the little warmth it could give. She was an alien child, fragile and pale, her skin glowing faintly under the moonlight. Her long hair clung to her frozen face, strands stiff with ice. Her breaths came out shallow, turning into mist before vanishing in the cold night. She hugged her knees tightly, but it did little to fight the deadly chill. Her eyes, large and luminous, stared out through the frozen bars. They no longer held hope. Days had passed, maybe weeks, she could no longer tell. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, thirst burned her throat, and the cold drained what little life remained in her. She whispered weak sounds into the night, but no, one came. The cage was not ordinary. Its bars were laced with energy locks designed to hold her even if she found strength. Whoever placed her here wanted her to suffer slowly, to freeze until her heart stopped. She was not just abandoned, she was sentenced. Far in the distance, faint lights blinked through the storm. The girl lifted her head, weakly trying to focus. For a moment, she thought her mind was playing tricks again. She had seen shadows before, heard whispers that were not real, but this light grew brighter, cutting through the darkness like fire in the night. Her lips trembled as she tried to call out. A broken cry escaped her throat, faint and cracked, lost in the storm. Still she tried again, her voice barely more, then a whisper carried by the wind. The sound reached ears that were not meant to be there. A lone human traveler, wrapped in heavy gear, trudged through the snow with steady steps. His breath fogged the inside of his helmet, and his boots sank deep with every step. He was not searching for anyone. He was only trying to survive the storm, to find shelter before the night grew worse. But then he heard it. A cry. Weak. Desperate. Not the sound of the wind. Not the howl of a beast. A living voice. He froze, his instincts on edge. Out here, voices usually meant danger. Raiders, hunters, or worse. Yet something in that cry struck him deep. It was too faint, too fragile to be a threat. It was the sound of someone begging to be found. He pushed forward, squinting against the storm, and soon the shape of the cage came into view. At first he thought it was just debris, some abandoned machine. Then he saw movement inside, tiny, trembling, alive. The human stopped, his heart beating hard. His mind told him to walk away. This was a trap, it had to be. No one locked a child in a cage and left her in the open unless it was bait. But then he saw her eyes. Two glowing eyes stared at him from behind the bars. Not human eyes, but filled with fear and pain. They begged without words. He stepped closer, fighting the pull between reason and compassion. The storm roared around him, trying to push him back. The ground cracked under the weight of the ice. Every step toward the cage felt heavier than the last. The girl pressed her weak hands against the bars, frost biting her skin. She did not know who this stranger was. She did not know if he was here to save her or to watch her die. But she had no choice. Her strength was almost gone. This was her last chance. The human knelt before the cage, brushing ice from the bars with his gloved hand. His visor reflected her fragile face. He could see the truth in her condition. She was moments away from death. He clenched his jaw. He knew the cost of helping. If someone placed her here, it meant she was hunted. Taking her side would bring enemies. But leaving her, leaving a child to freeze, was something he could not do. For a long moment, they only stared at each other. The storm screamed around them. Ice shattered against the cage, and still they held that gaze. One with fading hope, the other with a choice that would change everything. The human placed his hand on the bars, feeling the bitter cold bite through his glove. He whispered under his breath, his voice carried by the storm. No one deserves this. The girl blinked, her frozen lips moving, forming a single word. Help. And in that moment, he knew. He could not turn away. The night grew darker, but a spark had been lit. A bond formed in silence, in frost, in the shadow of death. What happened next would decide not only her fate, but his own. The storm did not rest. Snow lashed against the frozen wasteland, covering tracks as fast as they were made. The human stood before the cage, his breath heavy, his heart torn between reason and instinct. He had seen terrible things in his life, but never something like this. An innocent child left to die in the cold, her body shaking with every weak breath. He glanced around the barren land. Nothing but shadows and ice. His training told him, danger always hid where eyes could not see. He was alone, far from safe ground, and the girl's prison looked too deliberate. It was a trap waiting for the fool who cared enough to step close. Yet he remained there, boots frozen in place, unable to look away. Inside the cage, the alien girl leaned forward, her tiny hands gripping the bars. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, with faint lines of light pulsing under it. She was not human, that much was clear, but her suffering was something no language could hide. She whispered again, her voice so faint that even the wind almost swallowed it. "Please." The word cut deeper than the storm. The human's chest tightened. He had promised himself long ago never to get involved, never to risk his life for others after losing so much. Survival was his only rule. Yet here he was, standing in the snow, staring at a child who had no chance without him. He crouched near the bars, studying the frozen locks. Strange energy hummed faintly across the metal, glowing with a faint blue shimmer. This was no simple cage. It was technology beyond human design. His glove brushed the surface, and a sharp sting shot up his arm, forcing him to pull back. Whoever built this prison wanted to make sure no one could break it easily. The girl flinched at the spark but kept her eyes on him. Wide, glowing, desperate. She said nothing more, but he could hear her plea in silence. He turned his gaze toward the horizon once more. Still no sign of movement, but his gut told him they were being watched. He muttered under his breath, almost to himself, "If I open this cage, I make enemies. If I walk away, I make peace with myself, but she dies." The choice should have been simple, but it wasn't. He reached into his pack, pulling out a scanner. The screen flickered as he aimed it at the cage. The readings were unstable. The energy fields were both mechanical and organic, something beyond his full understanding. He frowned. Breaking it would take time, maybe hours, and he was not sure if she had hours left. Her lips trembled as she whispered again. This time, he understood, the word clearly. Cold. It was enough. His hands clenched into fists. He remembered the faces of his own family, the helpless cries he once failed to answer. He could not let this be another memory of regret. With a deep breath, he stepped closer. "I'll try," he said, his voice firm against the storm. The girl's eyes flickered with a spark of hope. It was faint, fragile, but it was there. He pulled out his multi-tool, its blade gleaming in the icy wind. Sparks burst as he struck against the energy lines, each blow sending pain through his arms. The bars trembled but did not break. He gritted his teeth and kept striking, knowing each sound might echo through the wasteland, drawing unwanted attention. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. His strength was wearing thin, his fingers numb inside his gloves. The storm grew harsher, slamming against his back, as if nature itself wanted to bury them both. Still he fought the cage, each strike louder, then the last. The girl pressed herself against the bars, her breath fogging in the air. She whispered something again, this time not in his language. It was soft, melodic, and broken by shivers. Even without knowing the words, he felt the meaning. She was praying, holding on to faith that someone, anyone, would save her. At last, one of the locks cracked, sending a shockwave through the bars. The human stumbled back, his muscles twitching from the blast. The cage groaned, its frozen edges splintering like glass. He was close, but not done. Then, a sound in the distance. The human froze, his head snapping toward the hills. Through the curtain of snow, faint lights moved, red glows like eyes searching the dark. He cursed under his breath. They were not alone anymore. The girl saw it too. Fear widened her glowing eyes, and she shook her head weakly as if warning him to leave before it was too late. But he did not move away. He stepped closer, gripping the bars once more. His voice was low but steady. If they come, they'll find me standing here, and if I stand here, you will not die in this cage. The storm raged louder, covering the land in a blanket of white. Shadows grew nearer, lights glowing brighter. The girl pressed her forehead to the bars, her eyes never leaving his. In that moment, a bond stronger than fear was born. The human drew a breath, raised his tool again, and struck with all his might. The sound echoed across the wasteland, HFY, signal that could not be hidden anymore. What began as chance had turned into destiny. The storm roared like an angry beast, swallowing every sound and every breath. Snow twisted in the air, covering the ground in a thick blanket of white. The human stood in front of the frozen cage, his tool raised, his body shaking from the cold and the strain. Each strike against the glowing bars sent sparks into the night, mixing with the snow like falling stars. Inside, the alien girl pressed her hands to the bars. Her lips moved, whispering weak words in her own language, as if her voice could give him strength. Her eyes followed his every move, filled with fear but also hope. She had been trapped for so long that the sight of someone fighting for her felt unreal, like a dream she could wake from at any moment. The human's arms ached. His gloves were torn, his breath heavy. The scanner on his wrist blinked red, warning him that the energy field was unstable. Each hit against the cage risked an explosion, but he had no choice. Time was running out. The girl's body was trembling harder now, her skin pale, her breath shallow. She would not last much longer. A loud crack echoed through the wasteland as one of the bars split open. Frost shattered around it and the energy lines flickered weakly. The girl gasped, her small body leaning closer to the gap. It was still too narrow, but it was the first real break she had seen. The human's heart pounded. He had broken one, but many more remained. His tool buzzed as he pressed it against the next lock, sparks burning his hands through the gloves. He gritted his teeth, ignoring the pain. He had faced storms before, he had faced hunger and loneliness, but this fight was different. This was not about his survival, it was about hers. In the distance, the red lights grew brighter. Shapes moved. Within the storm, tall figures with heavy armor. Their shadows stretched across the snow, growing closer with every second. They carried weapons that glowed faintly, cutting through the night like blades of fire. The girl's eyes widened in terror. She knew those shapes, those hunters. They were the ones who placed her here, the ones who wanted her life to end slowly. She pressed her forehead to the bars and shook her head as if telling him to stop, to run, to save himself. But the human did not stop. His strikes grew harder, faster, as if the approaching danger only fueled his resolve. He spoke through clenched teeth, his voice rough but strong. "I'm not leaving you here." The second lock cracked, sending a flash of light across the cage. The girl flinched at the brightness, but her trembling lips curled into the faintest smile. She was closer to freedom than ever before. The storm screamed louder, covering the sound of marching feet. But the human could feel it, the ground vibrating under the weight of their steps. He had minutes, maybe less. He adjusted his tool, sparks flying into his face as he worked on the third lock, his visor fogged with heat and cold clashing inside, his vision blurring. The girl's hands slipped from the bars. She was fading, her body too weak to hold on. Panic rushed through him. If he broke the cage but lost her before it opened, all of this would mean nothing. He shouted at her, his voice cutting through the storm. "Stay awake, fight it, don't give up." Her eyes opened halfway, glowing dimly. She nodded, though her strength was almost gone. The third lock shattered with a deafening crack. The cage shook violently, shards of ice falling to the ground. A hole had opened wide enough for her to crawl through, but the energy field still burned across the gap. It would tear her apart if she touched it. The human ripped a power cell from his own pack and slammed it against the bars. Sparks burst like lightning, and for a moment the field collapsed, leaving the gap open. Now, he growled, pulling the girl toward him. She hesitated, fear in her eyes. The cage had been her prison for so long that freedom itself felt dangerous, but his hand reached in, strong and steady, and she placed her fragile fingers in his palm. With one sharp pull, he dragged her out. Her body collapsed into his arms, light as snow. She gasped, her lungs filling with the bitter air, but she was alive, free for the first time since her capture. The human looked down at her, his heart heavy with relief. "You're safe now," he whispered, though he knew safety was far away. Because then, through the storm, the hunters appeared. Their armor glowed red, their weapons raised, their voices cutting through the wind like thunder. The girl buried her face against his chest, trembling in fear. The human tightened his grip around her, shielding her with his body. His muscles, tensed, his instinct sharp. He had broken the cage, but the chains of danger had only grown heavier. The first shot fired, slicing through the snow. He ducked behind the cage, holding the girl close, his mind racing. He had no plan, no safe path, only one truth. He would not let her fall back into their hands. The storm raged above them. The hunters closed in, and the human prepared for the fight of his life. The storm howled like a living creature, ripping across the wasteland with furious strength. Snow whirled through the air in thick waves, blinding every path, covering every trace of movement. The human held the alien girl tightly in his arms, her fragile body pressed against his chest, her breath shallow but steady. Behind them, shadows grew larger. Hunters moving fast, their armor glowing red against the white storm. The first blasts tore through the ground, sending ice and snow into the air. The human ducked, shielding the girl as shards cut against his suit. His boots sank deep into the frozen ground, but he forced himself forward step after step. Every second mattered. If he slowed down, if he stopped even once, the hunters would close in. The girl's eyes fluttered open. Her weak voice trembled. "They're coming." "I know," he answered, his breath rough, his voice steady. "Hold on to me." Her small hands gripped his coat. She was light, almost weightless, but the burden he carried was heavier than stone. It was not just her body in his arms. It was her life, her hope, and his own decision to fight for someone he had barely met. The snow grew thicker, the wind stronger. His visor fogged, the storm reducing his sight to nothing but shadows. He shifted his path toward the ridge, hoping the rocks would give some cover. The hunter's red lights cut through the storm like burning eyes, closer with every heartbeat. Another blast struck near his feet, exploding ice into the air. He stumbled but did not fall. He pulled the girl tighter, his muscles straining. His boots pounded against the snow as he ran faster. The hunters' voices echoed through the storm, sharp and commanding. Their words were in a language he did not understand, but their intent was clear. They wanted the girl back, dead or alive. He pushed harder, climbing the ridge. His body screamed with exhaustion, his lungs burning from the frozen air. But stopping was not an option. He glanced at the girl, her glowing eyes half closed, her breaths weak. If he gave in to the storm, she would not last. Reaching the top of the ridge, he slid down the other side, snow dragging at his legs. He landed hard, pain shooting through his knees, but he kept running. The hunters fired again, their shots carving holes in the ice around him. He zigzagged through the storm, forcing them to miss, his instincts guiding him more than his eyes. The girl lifted her head weakly, pointing toward a faint shadow in the distance. Through the blinding snow, a dark shape stood against the white. A hole. Structure half buried, maybe an old outpost, maybe a ruin. Shelter. He adjusted his grip and pushed toward it. Each step felt heavier, the storm pressing against him like a wall. His suit warned of low temperature, his strength draining, but he did not stop. He whispered to the girl, his voice rough but steady. "Almost there. Stay with me." The hunters. Lights grew brighter behind them. Their footsteps thudded through the snow, relentless. unstoppable. A sharp whistle cut the air, followed by a blast that hit the ground behind him, throwing him forward. He landed hard on his chest, the girl sliding from his arms. Panic surged through him. He scrambled, grabbing her before the snow could swallow her small body. She gasped, her eyes wide with fear. He pulled her close again, forcing himself to, his feet ignoring the pain in his ribs. The structure was closer now, its broken walls looming through the storm. He reached it just as another blast shook the ground, sending shards of ice past his head. He ducked into the ruin, pressing against the cracked walls for cover. The hunters stopped at the ridge, their glowing eyes scanning the storm. They had seen him enter the ruin. They would not stop. The human set the girl down gently against a stone wall. She trembled, her lips blue, her breaths shallow. He pulled off his outer cloak and wrapped it around her small frame, tucking it close to block. The cold, she looked up at him with weak eyes. Why? Why help me? He paused, his hands tightening around his weapon. His gaze turned toward the storm outside, where the hunter's lights grew nearer. He could have walked away. He could have let her freeze in that cage and saved himself. But when he saw her eyes in the darkness, something inside him changed. Because no one else would, he said simply. The girl blinked, her eyes wet with tears that froze on her cheeks. For the first time, a faint warmth spread through her chest, not from the cloak but from his words. The hunter's footsteps thundered closer. The ruin's walls shook as their blasts struck the outer edges. The human tightened his grip on his weapon, his jaw set. He could not fight them head-on, not with the storm blinding him and the girl too weak to move. He needed to outlast them, to use the storm itself as his shield. He pulled the girl closer, whispering firmly, "Stay quiet. Stay hidden." Her small hand clutched his wrist, trusting him completely. The storm screamed louder, covering their breaths, covering their fear. The hunter's shadows loomed at the edge of the ruin, red lights glowing through the snow. The human raised his weapon, his heart steady, his body ready. He was one man against many, but he had made his choice, and he would not let her be taken again. The storm raged outside, tearing across the land with endless fury. Inside the ruin, silence pressed close around them, broken only by the sound of the girl's shallow breaths. The human knelt beside her, brushing snow from her fragile body. Her lips were blue, her skin pale, and her small frame shook as though each heartbeat was a battle. He looked around the ruin. The cracked walls gave some cover, but the cold still cut through the stone like knives. They could not stay here long, not without warmth. His eyes scanned the broken space until they found a corner filled with old debris, splintered wood, shattered crates, and rusted scrap. It was not much, but it was enough. He moved quickly, dragging the wood together. His gloved hands trembled, not from fear, but from the freezing air biting through his suit. The storm outside masked his noise, but he knew the hunters were still close, searching. They would not stop. For now, though, survival meant fire. The girl watched him weakly, her glowing eyes following every movement. Her mind was heavy with fear, but in her heart a small spark of hope flickered. He was still here. He had not abandoned her. She whispered, faintly, her voice broken. What are you doing?" "Keeping you alive," he answered without looking up. His voice was firm, steady, like the sound of stone breaking through the storm. He pulled a lighter from his pack, its flame flickering weakly against the wind that slipped through the cracks. He shielded it with his hand, coaxing it into the pile of wood. At first, the flame fought against the damp air, threatening to die. Then it caught, spreading through the dry splinters. Soon, fire bloomed in the ruin, its glow casting shadows across the walls. The girl flinched at the sudden light, but then her trembling eased. The warmth reached her pale skin, chasing away the deadly chill. Her small hand stretched toward the flames, weak but desperate for the heat. The human pulled his cloak tighter around her and guided her closer to the fire. He sat beside her, his back against the wall, his weapon resting within reach. His eyes remained sharp, watching the storm outside, but his body leaned toward the fire, guarding her from the wind. For the first time, the girl felt warmth on her skin again. She closed her eyes, breathing slowly, as if the fire was filling her with new life. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "It feels like home." The human glanced at her. She looked fragile, like glass that could shatter with one touch, but the faint smile on her lips was proof she was still fighting. He leaned forward, feeding more wood into the flames. "You'll live," he said quietly. "As long as I'm here, you'll live." Her eyes opened, shimmering with both trust and fear. Why? The question hung in the air. Why would a human risk everything for someone like her? Why would he fight hunters, storms, and death itself for a child who was not even his own species? He did not answer right away. His gaze stayed on the fire, the flames reflecting in his visor. At last, his voice came low, steady, and heavy with truth. "Because no one deserves to die alone. Not you, not anyone." Her lips parted as if to speak again, but no words came. Instead, tears filled her eyes, glistening like crystals in the firelight. She'd been left to die, forgotten and unwanted, yet here was a stranger holding her life above his own. The fire crackled between them, its light pushing back the shadows. Outside, the storm roared, but inside, for the first time, there was warmth. The human pulled a small ration pack from his belt and tore it open. He held it out to her. "Eat." She hesitated, staring at the strange human food, but hunger gnawed at her stomach, and trust now outweighed fear. She took a bite, chewing slowly, her body shaking less with each swallow. Her eyes lifted to him, and she whispered, "Thank you." He nodded once, simple and firm. Hours passed in the ruin. The fire burned bright, their breaths rising together in the dim glow. The hunters' lights had vanished into the storm for now, but the danger remained. The human stayed awake, his hand resting on his weapon, his gaze shifting between the fire and the girl. She drifted into a fragile sleep, her head resting against his arm, her breaths steadier now. He looked down at her, his jaw tight. She was no longer just a stranger in a cage. She was someone he had chosen to protect, and that choice had bound their fates together. The storm began to ease, its howls softening into whispers. The firelight flickered against the walls, casting shadows that seemed almost alive. The human let out a long breath, his eyes still sharp, but his heart heavier than ever. Outside, the land was still dangerous. The hunters would return. But in this moment, in this fragile shelter, he had given her warmth, hope, and life. And in return, without even knowing it, she had given him something too, the reminder of what it meant to be human. The fire burned, low glowing embers casting faint light across the ruined stone walls. The storm outside had quieted, but the silence felt heavy, as if the world was holding its breath. The human sat near the flames, his weapon resting close, his body tired, but his mind still alert. The alien girl lay beside him, wrapped in his cloak, her breathing steadier than before. Hours had passed since he pulled her from the cage. She had warmed by the fire, eaten his food, and even found enough strength to rest. Yet her eyes never truly closed. Every sound of the storm, every shifting shadow in the ruin kept her awake. She had lived in fear too long for sleep to come easily. Now she stirred, her glowing eyes opening slowly. She turned her face toward him, her voice soft but clear. "You should not have saved me." The human frowned. "Why?" Her gaze dropped to the fire, its flickering light reflecting in her pale skin. She hesitated, as though the truth itself weighed heavily on her lips. Then she spoke, each word slow and deliberate. "Because I am not just a child. I am the last of my bloodline." The human's eyes narrowed, but he did not interrupt. He only listened. She pulled the cloak tighter around her fragile body and continued. "My people, they were rulers once. We carried voices that could guide, heal, and command. But that power also made us targets. Enemies rose against us, and one by one my family was hunted. I was taken before I could grow into my strength. They locked me in that cage to erase my line forever. Her words trembled, but her eyes held firm. If I die, my bloodline ends. If I live, they fear I will rise and take back what was lost. That is why they will never stop chasing me. That is why saving me puts you in danger. The human leaned back against the cold wall, his jaw tightening. He had expected a secret, but not this. She was not only an innocent child abandoned in the snow, she was a key to power, a reason for war. You think I should regret it, he said at last, his voice calm but sharp. She nodded faintly. If you stay with me, you will be hunted too. They will not forgive you, they will not stop until you are gone. The fire crackled, filling the silence between them. The human's eyes stayed on her, steady and unwavering. I did not save you for them. I saved you for you. Her lips parted, but no words came. He leaned forward, his voice lower but strong. I don't care about bloodlines or wars. I care about what I saw in that cage. A child who was left to die, alone, with no hope. I won't let anyone live their last moments that way, not you. Tears welled in her glowing eyes, but she blinked them back. She had grown used to hiding her pain, to staying silent. But his words broke through her walls like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She whispered, "No human has ever spoken to me like this." He gave a small, dry laugh. "Then maybe you've met the wrong humans." The girl smiled faintly, though her tears slipped free, trailing down her pale cheeks. For the first time in her memory, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt trust, but trust came with weight. She sat up slowly, clutching the cloak to her chest. "If you keep me alive, they will see you as my protector. They will come with more soldiers, stronger weapons. You will be their enemy as much as I am." The human adjusted his weapon, sliding it across his lap. His eyes glinted in the firelight, calm and unshaken. "Then let them come." Her chest rose sharply, breath caught between fear and awe. She had been told humans were selfish, cruel, and weak. Yet this man carried her through the storm, gave her warmth, and now declared war against those who hunted her. She whispered, almost in disbelief, "Why risk everything?" His gaze softened for the first time, his voice carrying not anger, but memory. "Because once I failed to save someone who needed me. I lived with that guilt. I swore I'd never let it happen again. You gave me a second chance." The fire crackled louder, as if agreeing with his words. The girl lowered her head, tears dripping into the cloak. "Then I promise. If I live, if I survive long enough to grow, I will make sure your choice was not wasted." The human said nothing, but inside something shifted. She was no longer just a burden, no longer just someone he had rescued by chance. She was a responsibility he had chosen, and that choice would shape everything that came after. Outside, the storm faded into silence. The sky began to clear, revealing faint stars through the cracks in the ruin. But with the silence came another sound, distant heavy footsteps marching across the snow. The girl's head snapped up, fear flashing in her glowing eyes. She whispered, "They are here again?" The human rose, pulling her gently to her feet, wrapping the cloak tighter around her. His weapon hummed as he powered it on. "Then it's time," he said firmly. "We move before they trap us here." Her small hand reached for his. He looked down at her, then clasped it tightly, steady and strong. Together, they stepped into the fading storm, leaving the shelter of fire behind. Ahead lay danger, but also the path of destiny. The night sky stretched wide above the wasteland, stars breaking through the fading storm. The ruin lay behind them, only ashes of fire left glowing in the dark. The human walked through the snow, with the alien girl at his side, her small hand gripping his tightly. Every step was heavy, every breath sharp in the frozen air. Yet he did not falter. The sound of boots echoed across the land. Shadows appeared on the ridge, red lights glowing from armored suits. The hunters had returned, stronger in number, their weapons blazing with energy. Their voices rang out in a harsh language demanding surrender. The girl froze, fear locking her body. Her eyes widened as she whispered, "They will not stop. They will kill you for helping me." The human pulled her closer, his hand steady on his weapon. His voice carried no fear, only resolve. "Then they will learn what one human can do." The hunters spread across the ridge, surrounding them. Snow crunched under their heavy boots. As they closed in, the storm had ended, leaving no cover, no shadows to hide in. The human stood tall, his body shielding the girl, his weapon ready. One of the hunters stepped forward, his armor towering, his voice sharp and commanding. He pointed his weapon at the girl, speaking words that needed no translation. She was their target, the reason for this hunt. The human's jaw tightened. He raised his weapon and fired. The blast cut through the cold air, striking the hunter's chest and throwing him back into the snow. The silence broke and chaos exploded. Energy bolts lit the night, scorching the ground. The human moved fast, pulling the girl behind him, firing with sharp precision. Each shot was answered with a storm of fire. He ducked behind a frozen boulder, shielding her as explosions shook the ground. The girl clutched his arm, her voice trembling. "You cannot fight them all." His breath came rough, his visor cracked from the heat of a near miss. Yet his eyes burned with determination. "I do not need to fight them all, I only need to keep you safe." He fired again, striking another hunter, then pulled her forward. They moved through the snow, weaving between shattered rocks, using the land itself as their shield. The hunters followed, their red lights burning like demons in the dark. The girl stumbled, her strength fading. He lifted her into his arms once, more pushing forward with everything left in him. The hunters closed in, their voices louder, their weapons striking the ground around him. The snow erupted, flames cutting through the ice. At the edge of the ridge, he stopped. Below lay a deep ravine, jagged ice stretching into endless dark. Behind, the hunters advanced in full force. There was no path left. The girl's eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "You should leave me. If they take me, you can live." The human looked down at her, his chest heaving, his body scarred from the fight. His voice came steady, carrying the weight of his choice. "I did not save you to give you away. I saved you because your life matters, and as long as I stand, they will not take you." The hunters raised their weapons, light gathering for a final strike. The human stood firm, placing the girl behind him, his weapon glowing in his hands. He knew he might not survive, but his decision was made. Then something changed. The girl stepped forward, her glowing eyes brightening with sudden strength. Her voice, weak until now, rang out clear across the ridge. The sound carried power, ancient and commanding, shaking the air itself. The hunters froze, their weapons lowering as the force of her voice struck them. Her bloodline had awakened. The power her captors feared was no longer hidden. She raised her small hands, and the storm itself seemed to return. Wind swirling around her, snow lifting into the air. The hunters staggered, their lights flickering as the storm consumed them. The human shielded his eyes, his body braced against the wind, but he did not move away from her. He stayed close, ready to fight if she fell. The girl's voice rose once, more echoing across the wasteland. The hunters broke, their formation shattered, their strength swallowed by the storm. One by one they retreated, vanishing into the night. Silence returned. The storm faded, leaving only stars and the sound of the wind. The girl collapsed to her knees, her strength drained. The human caught her, holding her close. She looked up at him, her eyes glowing faintly, filled with gratitude. "You gave me hope when I had none. You stood when no one else would. Because of you, I live." He brushed frost from her hair, his voice quiet but firm. "Because of you, I remember what it means to be human." The wasteland stretched before them, endless and dangerous. But they no longer faced it alone. Together they walked forward, their steps carving a new path through the snow. One human had made a choice, and that choice had changed everything.